Hi everyone. Sorry for that slide. I was Googling for Austria jokes, but like nothing comes up. I just had to reuse the one from a German conference, so sorry for that too. So, yeah, before I start my talk, I want to get something out of the way, because this like coming out of a curtain, like from behind the stage, and we have this attitude of like being speakers on a stage and everything, it's like, I don't know if it's right, you know? We have this term, like you hear it online, rock star developers, but like this is a rock star. This is what a rock star looks like. This is everything but a rock star, so I feel like we're using the wrong term there. And there's another term that I really hate is when they're gonna say about someone, he rocked the stage. After a tech talk, they're saying he rocked the stage. I think it should be something like, he read his notes from a made on a plane slides, trembling for 30 minutes while praying while people won't find out he's a fraud. So that's a better explanation, because Rolling Stones rocked the stage in Rio de Janeiro in front of 1.5 million people. That's rocking the stage. So now that that's out of the way, I want to encourage every one of you to try and apply and talk here, because we're all the same. At the end of the day, we are just all code monkeys trying to like make weird libraries work together by writing shitty hacks. So yeah. That being said, if you can say I'm a rock star, I'm kidding. So my name sounds German. I'm not actually German. I don't know any German. And I love frontend, I love open source, and I love making products. Maybe you know some of my products from the open source ones. I have custom React scripts and Mobix router, and from products I have OK Google, CZ, and reactacademy.io. Sorry if I triggered someone's phone. And CZ is a tool that might be interesting for you. It's for previewing multiple devices at once when you're testing responsive design. And now, currently, I'm focused on teaching, so I have my own thing called React Academy, which is like on-site workshops. And I teach about React, React Native, everything around that ecosystem. So yeah, you can find more about it there. You can find more about me at kitze.io. This is actually slow. All right. Like my nick is Kitze everywhere except on Twitter, because some like douchebag took my name and now I have to be the Kitze. He tweeted once and he's not tweeting anymore. So yeah. My talk today is about some highly confidential Apple code. That's just the code for logging into High Sierra. But I'm going to talk about state management in a GraphQL era. We already talked about GraphQL, but just to remind you, what is GraphQL? I have to wait for those transitions. It's the thing that's eventually going to replace REST, but you keep lying to yourself, I don't need that. So if we see some REST code, how do we fetch a bunch of data from REST APIs? It looks like this. If we combine it into a GraphQL call, it's a cool transition. I don't know if it's going to work. Yeah. We just tell our GraphQL query what do we need, and we can grab everything from the client. So what we did with GraphQL is we put the client more in control. So now we have the power. If our backend developer is lazy, we can do whatever we want on the front end because we have the control, right? And that's good, but it's also bad because nowadays, like in the last few years, what we did is we converted to single-page applications. And in my opinion, single-page applications ruined everything. Yeah, we were trying to make like a faster car, but eventually, if the slides change, it will be good. Should I try again? All right. Oh, there it is. There's a faster car. So instead of making a faster car, we got to that with single-page app. It's just like a weird thing. We put everything on the client. Everything is on the client now. And previously, it was like server-side render and so on. So when I say everything is on the client, what do I mean? Like, what is state management? How can we define state management? What's going on the client? So we have forms, we have routing, inputs, tabs, filters, date pickers, menus, checkboxes, navigation. We have a bunch of this small stuff, but like the big thing, the big problem in state management in single-page apps is the data. That's like the biggest issue. And it's the #1 reason why state management is hard. And why is that? Because we have like few things around data. Those are like data fetching, caching, reading, and cache invalidating, which is hard. So I'll throw you back a little bit about how I did my single-page app, my first one. It was in jQuery, and this is me writing jQuery code. So it was one main.js file. It has 4,000 lines or 3,000 lines of code. It's just main.js, right? And inside of it, it fetched a data.json file, which was 1 megabyte. We didn't care. Just grab all the data. We don't need to care about the bundle or anything. And inside of that file, we did like state management, UI manipulating, data fetching, cache invalid. Everything was into that main.js file. It has a freaking calendar plugin in it. Like, I had a bunch of code and then a comment. Calendar starts here, and then the calendar code, and then more code. So no imports, no splitting into modules. It was a mess. It's still in production, like the government is still using it, the government of my country, but it's an unmaintainable mess because you don't want to put everything into one file. You want to separate your concerns, right? Then I managed my company, I managed to convince my company to use Angular. I don't know which is the current version. We should call it just Angular now, I think. And we moved to Angular 1.0 because it simplified state management and data fetching and everything for us. I was pretty happy going from jQuery to Angular because I could separate things into controllers, directives. It sounded great until my roommate asked me, can you explain me that new framework thing you're working on? And in my head, it sounded clear, but when I started talking, I'm like, dude, don't worry. It's just a controller. You put it in a factory. You put it in a service. The service is actually a factory, but you inject it. It's like, what are you talking about? I'm going to stick to jQuery. So I was like, maybe this is not the right approach to frameworks. Maybe we should switch to something else. Eventually, we stuck with Angular for a while, but we went on to the next thing. Not going to dwell on it. It's great. Everyone speaks about it. Yeah, React is awesome. It solved all our problems. And I'm going to tell you about me trying to be smart and when I fetched my first data requests with React. So I wasn't using any state management library. I was new, right? I was using setState. And I tried doing few API calls, but I hated that loading spinner thingy, right? I would go to the post page and it would fetch the post again. So I tried to be too smart instead of finding a solution, how can I solve it properly? I tried to be too smart and actually wrote my own caching thingy. It was pretty stupid. It cached by key, so the key would be /API/post and the data would be just the object that comes. And no loading spinner. It was great for a while. And then I needed to invalidate that cache and I'm like, oh my God, I got myself into a mess. So I started, of course, Googling and go on Reddit and Stack Overflow, how do people do complex state management? It's not complex, it's just few network requests. And of course, the answer everywhere about state management was Redux. It still is in a lot of places. Just use Redux, you'll be fine. The problem is, immediately when I started using Redux, I love it and I hate it at the same time. I love it. It's a genius concept. If you haven't watched the Egghead videos about recreating Redux, it's pretty great. You should watch it. Even if you use even if you're a backend engineer doing Java, just watch the Redux videos because it's an awesome concept. I love it because of that. It's really simple and genius concept, but I don't like it because it has a lot of boilerplate for writing simple things, and it's overhyped and not needed in most situations. Now you may be thinking, Kitze, what are you talking about? It's not like that. But the creator of Redux can actually tell you that he wrote a freaking article saying you might not need Redux. That's like Metallica releasing an album and saying, don't listen to this, it's crap. He's vouching, he's talking against his own library. He's he doesn't want people to use his own library. I mean, I respect him about that because it is like that. It's overhyped. You don't need it in every freaking project. So there was this thread on Reddit about a beginner. He just started with React. And he said, hello, I just started my first step. How can I do network requests? Of course, the first comment, the most upvoted comment was, just use Redux Saga. It's like, there's a bug in my house, I'm going to use a flamethrower. Don't worry, just use a flamethrower. It doesn't make any sense. You don't recommend that to a beginner. So I started to hate this whole mentality of just recommending beginner stupid things. And yeah, as I explained, I teach people things. My other roommate was interested into React Redux and so on, and this was me explaining Redux to him. We were in a restaurant, and he had this app idea. He was like, dude, I have the stupidest app idea, but I need it for my company. A different person does the coffee in our company every day, and we need a simple randomizer. It will take a bunch of names, an array of names, randomize one, just display it on a big screen. And he was like, we can have one index.html file, one jQuery file, it's good. I'm like, no, we need Redux. We need Redux for this thing. We're going to make it a nice little array with reducers and everything. We need Redux for this app. And he's like, fine, I'm going to listen to you for a while. We're in a restaurant, it's late at night. It's 9 p.m. By the time I explained how to push a thing into an array in Redux, the restaurant almost closed. Even the waiter was speaking, was like, what the fuck is that boilerplate? You don't need that for an array. It was terrible. And when I started explaining to him, that was the second time I heard myself, and I sounded stupid. I was like, dude, I'm going to try something new. I've been hearing about this thing called MobX. I don't know if it's good or bad. I'm going to try it tonight, and tomorrow maybe I'm going to convince you to use that. And MobX was just magic. I sat down the next day. I went through the concept, through the docs. I wrote the app about the randomizer of the names. I even made it randomized faces with a face recognition API from Microsoft. So I had a lot of free time to do more stupid things with MobX. So it was amazing for me. Anyway, my point is we had all of these ways to solve state management. We have all of these fights since the dawn of jQuery, and let's see if this will work. Okay. we had jQuery versus Mutu. We're going to wait for the transitions a bit. And it's going to ruin the slide, but OK. We had Angular versus Ember. We have GraphQL versus REST. We have Redux versus MobX. We have React versus Vue. We have Apollo versus Relay, and so on and so forth. And the mistake here for all of these things, including the last one that you're laughing about, it's we're asking what's better instead of like what's suitable for my app, what is suitable for my team, what is suitable for our use case. We're asking the wrong question. People online are asking what's better, Redux or MobX, and that's the wrong question. Because in my opinion, about the last one, awkward slide transition. We need to wait. I'm going to try again. Even the slide doesn't want to display him. Jesus. You will see in a second. My talk is short, so this is good. It's like saving me some time. All right. I think about the last one. I think that Trump is great. I don't know if you're going to agree with me. A lot of awkward like stares. And when you say Trump is great, Trump is good, but he's great on a golf course. He's terrible as a president, right? So it's the same with state management and all the other libraries. It's about the context when you say it. You cannot say he's good or bad, he's great, he's better or worse. It's all about the context. So enough about Trump and analogies. Let's see some examples about data fetching. We have a simple fetch request to grab a bunch of to-dos from a REST API, and we need 4 lines to display those to-dos, right? Here's some Redux code about fetching to-dos. So I need to dispatch an action for fetching those to-dos. I have to dispatch a success action for receiving those to-dos, and a fail action in case they fail. That's only one slide. On the second slide, we need to do something with those actions. So we have a reducer, and we do something like, we have 2 slides for fetching to-dos. It doesn't make any sense. If we show the same thing, how it works in MobX, it's just a class. It has an observable of to-dos, so I can just have an action. I just say this.todos equal to-dos. It's a bit simpler. It's still a slide. And then we're going to switch to GraphQL. How do we fetch data in GraphQL with a component? It's just like this. Like in one slide, I can fit the component, the logic, the loading spinner, and the query. It's amazing. So we have a query. I say that I want the to-dos with the title and the date. And here I have some logic. If it's loading, just show loading. Otherwise, map over my to-dos. So what is the problem here? Why did we have a problem with state management? How did GraphQL solve it so easily? The problem is we were fixing the sink, like where the stuff was coming from. What did we see actually? Instead of fixing the well, instead of where the stuff was coming from. So the idea is the sink would be state management and the well would be REST APIs. We needed to fix the well. We needed to replace with something better, like GraphQL. So if you go back to my previous slide about state management, we have all of these things that look like complex, but now that we remove data, we're just left with all the small things. So you can tackle them in any way you want. You don't need Redux, you don't need MobX. Maybe you need it, maybe not. I'm going to suggest some like stacks that you can use. But now it's simple. Now that we don't care about the data, GraphQL takes care of the data, we can only take care about this. And now this looks way simpler. So I'm going to show a slide from Peggy about how many lines did they remove when they moved to GraphQL. I mean, granted, they added like 1,000 new lines, but they removed like 5,000 lines just by moving from Redux to GraphQL. That's amazing. The question of the day and the topic of my talk is, do we even need a state management library when using GraphQL? And I'm this guy. I'm like, I don't know. It's still about the context, you know. I cannot tell you yes or no. So what I did is I have like 6 suggestions for you, like what stack can you use in order to tackle GraphQL and the other stuff. Awkward transition, waiting for it. There it is. So I have these like example stacks that you can use, and I'm going to explain them one by one. So the first one, man, I miss an HDMI cable right now. This wireless thing sucks. What transition library? No, it's Keynote. It's written in Angular, that's why it's so slow. No, I'm kidding. All right. Finally, the vanilla stack is you're just using Apollo, you're using setState, and you're eventually using a router library. It doesn't have to be React Router. You can use Router 5 or something else. The second stack would be called I hate forms. And if you have like some complex forms on the project that you're working on, you might want to involve a library for handling forms. Like you have Formic, a bunch of other libraries on GitHub. You can use them to handle forms, but you don't need a global state management library just to handle forms. Then we have my users live in tunnels, and you can use Apollo, router library, and Apollo cache persist. That's going to persist your data so it works offline. The problem with this is you need offline mutations. Like if someone clicks like on a picture. You want that to happen even if they don't have a network connection. The problem here is it's a bit in the opposite direction of the simplicity of Apollo and GraphQL, because if you use Redux or Redux offline to do this functionality, you actually need to wrap every mutation in a Redux action to kind of babysit it to do the thing you want it to do. I just want to add this freaking to do. I don't want to babysit it to add the to do. So I don't like this. I don't like the direction it's going in, but the Apollo team is eventually working on links like retrialing, mutation queuing, and so on. They're going to help to make this simple as Apollo is right now. So the next stack is called, wait for it. It's like an episode of How I Met Your Mother. A lot of wait for it, wait for it. Okay, I can just talk about it. You don't need to see it. The next stack is called I Want to Go Home Early, and it involves MobX. It's inspired by the tweet from Michel. He says, like, MobX doesn't try to prove an academic point. It just wants you to go home early. But don't do that. If you're paid by the hour, you just stick to Redux. Don't go into the MobX ecosystem. So yeah, for this stack, you're going to use MobX, MobX React 4, MobX Router, and the next stack is Next Level. For this one, you might want to use Apollo, Next.js, and SetState. You don't need Redux, you don't need MobX. SetState is enough. Next.js is server-side rendered. It's amazing. I've tried this one, but the next one I'm going to suggest, you might react like, what? We don't want to do that. Like, who is doing that right now? Like, use full page reloads when you're navigating between routes, right? Treat every separate page as a mini app. It might not make sense to you if you're in the whole single page apps thing, but have you been lately to like Amazon, Airbnb, all of these huge companies? Have you seen a single page app? No. Like you go on Airbnb, you click on an apartment, you see this full page transition, and it goes to a different page. You go to Amazon, you click on a product, it's not a single page app. It's gonna transfer you to a different page. So like treat it like mini apps. You have an app for the products, an app for the cart, an app for a single product, and so on. You don't have one monolithic big single page app. That might solve state management for you. And the last one is you can maybe use only Apollo. Like Peggy explained yesterday, we can use Apollo link state. You don't need any other library for doing this state management thing. You can just use link state, and you can combine your client-side schema with your server-side GraphQL schema. At the end, you're going to end up, your components are going to be simple. They're going to query the data they need from the server along from the client. So when a beginner comes on your team, he will be like, oh, awesome. I can see everything this component needs right here above the component. Let's try to make a conclusion here. When using GraphQL, in 90% of the cases, you won't need these libraries. But if you still want to use them, it's fine. I just give you some examples. Now I'm going to contradict my talk and everything I talk about. So who am I to tell you what to do? Like, why would you listen to a speaker on stage about what you should do with your apps? Like, I gave you some pretty cool ideas, but you shouldn't be stressed about them. Like, you shouldn't go home and you're like, oh, fuck, we're still using REST. We need to jump to the GraphQL thing. Like, yeah, it simplified my life, like our team's life and so on. You don't have to use it. So when I have this slide, who am I to tell you what to do? You have to think about my context. Like a lot of people, they follow me on Twitter, they follow the advice. I tweet about, hey, there's this awesome library. I tweet that every week. Like if you listen to me, you would change libraries every week, you know? So a little bit of a backstory about like, how do I work and who do I work with might help you making the decision, like, do we want to use what he's talking about or not? So I work alone. I don't work for clients. Right now, I'm just working on training. I don't know what I'm doing, to be honest. I'm just experimenting with JavaScript. And I experiment with a new library every week. Like literally, I try the latest and greatest. I live on the bleeding edge. And eventually, I'm going to make a Christmas tree out of this slide. So would you listen to a guy who does that? The Christmas tree didn't, these slides are doing my jokes. All right. It's going to happen. So yeah, a lot of people don't know, they think like he works in a team, he knows what he's talking about, but no, I work alone. There's a freaking Christmas tree, right? Would you trust a guy who does this at a conference? No, like, my point is you should always evaluate the context and your situation, like your situation of your team, before you follow blindly other people's advice. You're going to end up like those people. So I'm going to tell you a short story about a client project that while I was freelancing, we were working for a client. And he was like, we have a proof of concept. We don't have users yet, but we want you to do this app, all right? It should do this and that. And then we decided, like, what stack are we going to use? Of course, we went with React. We wanted to learn React. It was too complex. We started to use Redux. It was even more complex. Like, we hit a wall where, like, Redux was too complex. And this client wanted to shift strategies, like, every week. Like, it's a startup. They have new ideas every week, right? And we settled on Redux, but it was too hard to shift strategies with Redux. It was like a lot of boilerplate. You cannot just switch if they want a new feature. It wasn't easy for us to switch and make the new feature because we had a lot of boilerplate code. Eventually, we refactored to Apollo using GraphQL. But the moment here was like we started using Apollo. We didn't know what we were doing. Eventually, we needed to invalidate the cache, right? So after we fetch a bunch of things, we eventually want to update, let's say, I don't know, a blog post. And when you read the documentation of Apollo on how do you update the cache, like it's a lot of code for updating the cache. Now it's gotten simpler. Back in the day, it was way complex. And I was like, how about instead of updating the cache manually, how about we fetch the network request again? Like I do a mutation, like create a post, and then immediately just refetch all the queries. So we did like mutation.then refetch queries. It felt a little bit dirty, like when I was writing that type of code, it's like, I'm refetching, I'm just fetching more data. It doesn't feel right? But don't be scared of the network request. The network requests were like 200 bytes, 300 bytes, to 1 kilobyte max, like the new network request we were getting back. So a few kilobytes of data are better than over-engineering the thing, and then the client comes and they're like, we want to switch to a completely different thing, right? So we didn't want to mess with the updating of the cache in a perfect way. We just wanted the thing to work. The client didn't know. They didn't care about the stack we picked. It was fast. It worked for them. So we didn't want to optimize for a scenario that wasn't happening. Like a lot of people in this scenario will be like, no, we must do the perfect way. We must do the perfect way like it says in the docs, in the Redux docs, in the Apollo docs. So just see your users, evaluate what your users need. If the site is slow, if they're complaining like, oh my God, this network request takes ages, then you go and do it the right way. But this worked for us. Now they have big clients, they have like IKEA, Deutsche Telekom, so on, they have like thousands of users. They're still using the same thing. They didn't even once update the Apollo cache manually. It works for them, the clients are happy, it works pretty fast. They didn't want to over-engineer things, and it works. Me in my past, I also used to over-engineer things, and now I'm just trying to make my users happy. Like I work on my own apps, I work on my own like mini apps and so on. And I'm trying to think that my goal is to make the user happy. Like you will see a lot of tweets saying, finally, at the end of this day, I managed to connect Redux Saga with Redux Form to make this login form. And he spent his whole day on it, but the user at the end of this is like, fine, I can log in. That's it. Like you should always think about the user side, like what value am I giving to the user? Not just make it fun for yourself. Yeah, you're gonna make a fun day at work for yourself, but what are you gonna deliver to the user? It's a completely different story. So even if you're an engineer in a big company that you don't care for, you might wanna care for the users more than you care for your tidy and perfect code. So I had this multiple times where a person, like, can you raise your hand if you ever felt like this? Like, I made something, it works and I think it's awesome, but I'm not sure if it's right. Like, right? You did this awesome hack, and it feels like you're a genius, but deep down you're like, will Dan Abramov approve of my code? I don't know. Maybe he's going to think it's bad. Like, you shouldn't think like that because we're thinking what's right, but there's in software development right now, there's no right. Like, there were guys talking about WebAssembly, like running C in the web. Like, what is right, what is wrong at this point? Like, you can do whatever the fuck you want in the browser right now. You can use C in the browser. Like, that's crazy. So that's why we cannot ask ourselves, like, what is right all the time. Just do something. If it works for you, stick with it. You don't have to evaluate if it's right or wrong. Time for some router examples, not one. So I've never used React Router 4. That's amazing to some, because I'm teaching React, and if my group asks me, can you tell us something about routing, I'll be like, fuck, I don't know anything about React Router 4. Because I wrote my own router, like for MobX, maybe, I don't know, 2 years ago it was. And then I updated it like 3 times because I'm a shitty open source maintainer. Like I have 20 issues open, it works for me, like I don't care. And I never had to dive into React Router 4. I know it's terrible, I'm terrible, sorry for that. Sorry for whoever opened a PR request in November 2014. I will look at it one day. So the thing is, I made a thing, it works for me, I think it's good. A lot of people, not a lot, but it has like some users. And I never ask myself, should I refactor my app into React Router 4 just because other people are using it, right? I don't care, it works for me. It's fine. Then I have another example. A friend did something with React Router 4, like he made a component that's going to eventually, in a smart way, prefetch all of the other links. So when the users navigate from page 1 to page 2, they're not going to see a blank page. They're immediately going to go to that page. And he posted it to a Slack channel, and he asked, guys, does this look like a hack? Because I think that if it works for you, dude, it's awesome. He's like, but Michael Jackson and Ryan Florence said that this isn't possible in React Router. If you made it it possible, it's eventually possible. Don't seek for approval for every freaking thing you do. If you made it possible, it works for you. It doesn't have to be a hack. It's a thing that works. Next example, Nomad List. I don't know if you know the site, but it's a guy running it on vanilla PHP, no frameworks. Like he literally has 4,000 lines of if else, if else, if else. He's not using a framework. He's saying if it's a post request with that key, posts, return all the posts, like bunch of if else. He's making 30K per month by just running vanilla PHP and jQuery. He doesn't seek approval if you think that Redux Saga is better, right? He's just shipping for his users and he doesn't care for your opinion. It's funny because his brother, when this guy got into web development, he was like, I'm gonna do YOLO development, I'm gonna look at stuff online, copy other stuff, I'm gonna make sure it works, I'm gonna ship value for the users, because his goal was making a product. And his brother, when he got into web development, he was like, I'm gonna learn Meteor. He was like, dude, you wanna make a product, just try doing something. He was like, no, I'm gonna go into Meteor. And then he says like, 2 years later, I have shit ton of money, my brother knows Meteor. So the difference is his brother never made a product, but now he's an expert in like syncing and backend, frontend stuff in Meteor. He can do pretty crazy stuff. He never shipped a product, he never made a thing. My point is you don't want to be on the latest and greatest all the time. Then I think this is the last example of the weird examples. It's a hospital. So I talked to a friend and he explains me his GraphQL stack. And he's like, we did the most crazy thing at work this week. Is this GraphQL stack? And he explains me like a crazy caching layer and like optimistic responses. It works in like 1 millisecond. Everything is coming back. Like, it's crazy fast. We did all of these layers. It's and I lost him after the first sentence. Like, I don't understand half. I'm a developer. I didn't understand half of the things he said, right? I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool what you did. You're not Facebook. What kind of app were you working on? And this is what he said. We were working, it's a landing page for a hospital. Like, no, the nurse is not gonna be like, doctor, he's dying because our landing page is not fast enough. Like, why did you do all of that effort for doing a landing page for a hospital, right? Yeah. Thanks. I feel sorry for my friend now. So, don't feel bad for not using the latest and greatest. You'll be fine with whatever you're using. If you're not using GraphQL, it's fine. I'm going to give you the last example that just Sarah told me just an hour ago. Oh no. Okay, I can tell you the example without the slides, if you can fix the slides meanwhile. So, service workers. Who doesn't know anything about service workers here? I don't know anything. I know what they're doing. I've never used them in a real-life project, right? And I don't feel bad about it because I haven't had the need, or none of my client projects have the need to use service workers, so I didn't use one. So Sarah, for React Fest, they used the service workers just for the sake of it, and they had to buy a different domain, a UK domain, because users who opened the site once had a cached version of it. Now they deployed a new version, and they couldn't show it to the users, so what they did is they redirected the US version to the UK version just because they had a service worker. So it doesn't mean if you're using the latest and greatest that it's gonna be the best. Sometimes you can screw up like that. If I can see my last slide here, it would be great. What's going on? To go to the display. All right. Let's see. Oh, it's fine. Cool. So to sum up a couple of things, like points from this talk. Stop seeking external approval in everything that you're doing. Stop finding all the answers in other people's projects. Sometimes you have to believe in the code that you're writing. You should stop feeling insecure about your code because nobody actually knows what they're doing. Trust me, like even the best developers, you think they're the best, they don't know what they're doing. And the last one is, for God's sake, delete your Twitter account. Because no, you're not gonna have fun. Like every day, like Jason Miller has a new library. You don't wanna be on Twitter if you wanna focus on your stack, right? And about the GraphQL thing, if you like what you're using, like you may have an amazing experience with REST or whatever you're using, don't feel bad about my talk. Just forget about it, keep using what you're using, and keep shipping and being productive. Thank you very much for listening. You can find more info about me here. Thank you.